My daughter said, "We voted. You're too old to travel with us," like she was announcing the weather forecast, not breaking my heart into 1,000 pieces. The words came from Susan, my eldest, delivered with the clinical precision she used in her law practice, as if reducing me to a liability assessment would somehow make the cruelty more palatable. I was sitting at my kitchen table, where we'd planned dozens of family vacations over the years, and suddenly I was being voted out of my own family's adventures. If you've ever been told you're too much trouble by the people you've spent your life putting first, if you've ever had your age used as a weapon against your dreams, settle in for this story. Sometimes the people who try to ground us give us the perfect reason to soar higher than we ever imagined possible. And if you believe that life's greatest adventures can begin at any age, hit subscribe on Grandpa's Stories. This tale is about discovering that being excluded from one journey can lead to the most incredible journey of your life. The family meeting had been Susan's idea, of course. She'd arranged it with the same efficiency she brought to her legal cases, scheduling a time when all 3 of my children could be present to discuss Mom's situation. I'd thought they wanted to plan our annual summer vacation together, something we'd been doing for 15 years since my husband Robert passed away. Instead, I found myself facing what felt like a tribunal determining my fitness for family inclusion. Michael sat uncomfortably in the corner, avoiding eye contact while Susan laid out their concerns like evidence in a courtroom. "Mom, you slowed us down last year in Colorado. You couldn't keep up with the hiking, you needed extra bathroom breaks, and frankly, you seemed overwhelmed by the altitude." Jennifer nodded in agreement, adding her own observations about my supposed limitations. "And remember how tired you got during that walking tour in Boston? We had to change our entire itinerary." The irony wasn't lost on me. These were the same children I'd carried on countless adventures when they were young, the ones I'd patiently accommodated when they needed nap times, bathroom breaks, and simplified itineraries. I'd been the one planning every detail, booking every hotel, researching every restaurant, handling every logistical challenge while they focused on enjoying themselves. Now that patience was being reframed as burden, and my needs were being categorized as inconvenience. Susan pulled out a folder. She'd actually prepared documentation for this intervention, and began reading from what sounded like a prepared statement. "We've discussed this extensively, and we feel it would be better for everyone if you considered staying home this year. We're planning a more active trip. Lots of walking and outdoor activities that might be challenging for someone your age." The phrase "someone your age" hung in the air like an accusation, as if turning 69 was a crime I'd committed against their vacation plans. The voting aspect was the cruelest touch of all. They'd actually held a formal vote, 3 against 1, with me not even present to defend myself. Democracy in action, if democracy meant the majority could decide the minority was too inconvenient to include. Susan presented the results like she was announcing election returns, proud of their systematic approach to excluding their mother from family time. I listened to their rehearsed concerns about my mobility, my energy levels, my ability to keep up with their ambitious itineraries, and realized they'd reduced me to a collection of perceived limitations rather than seeing me as their mother, who'd created every family tradition they were now excluding me from. The woman who'd organized their birthday parties, their graduations, their weddings, and their children's celebrations was suddenly too burdensome to include in a simple vacation. They seemed to have forgotten who had taught them to love travel in the first place. When Susan was 8 years old, she'd been terrified of flying, clinging to my hand during our first family trip to Disney World, while Robert tried to distract her with games and stories. I'd spent that entire flight rubbing her back, whispering reassurances, and promising adventures that would make the scary airplane ride worthwhile. By the time we landed, she was already planning what rides we'd experience first. Michael had been my hiking companion since he could walk, holding my hand on nature trails while I pointed out birds and wildflowers, teaching him to appreciate the outdoors that now apparently moved too slowly for his adult pace. Some of my most treasured memories were of carrying his tired little body on my shoulders during those last miles of mountain paths, listening to his sleepy observations about the world from his elevated perch. Now that same hiking enthusiasm was being used to justify leaving me behind. Jennifer's love of cultural experiences had been nurtured through countless museum visits, historical tours, and educational vacations, where I'd researched age-appropriate activities and spent hours answering her endless questions about art, history, and different cultures. The walking tours she now claimed exhausted me had been her favorite activities as a child, when I'd carried snacks, water, and backup entertainment to ensure her comfort and engagement throughout long days of exploration. After Robert died, our family vacations became even more important to me. They were anchors in a world that suddenly felt unmoored, opportunities to create new memories while honoring old traditions. I'd thrown myself into planning elaborate trips that would bring joy to my grieving family, destinations that offered something for everyone, experiences that would remind us that life continued to hold beauty and adventure, even after profound loss. The Colorado trip Susan had criticized so harshly was actually a perfect example of my adaptability rather than my limitations. When the altitude affected me more than expected, I'd found alternative activities at lower elevations, discovered charming local cafes where we could rest and regroup, and turned what could have been a disappointment into opportunities for different kinds of bonding. My grandchildren still talk about the afternoon we spent learning to pan for gold instead of hiking, memories created because their grandmother was flexible enough to change plans. The Boston walking tour incident Jennifer mentioned had been during an unusually hot summer day when everyone was struggling with the heat and crowds. I'd been the one who suggested we break up the tour with stops at air-conditioned museums, who found the perfect restaurant for a leisurely lunch, who turned a potentially miserable day into a comfortable and enjoyable experience for everyone. But somehow my problem-solving had been reframed as creating problems. Most painfully, they'd forgotten that I'd been funding these family vacations for years, quietly covering costs that allowed their families to enjoy experiences they couldn't have afforded on their own. Hotel upgrades, restaurant meals, activity fees, souvenirs for the grandchildren. I'd handled these expenses gladly, never mentioning the financial contribution, because the joy on everyone's faces was payment enough. Now I was being excluded from adventures I'd been subsidizing, dismissed as dead weight by people who'd benefited from my generosity without acknowledgement. That night, sitting alone in the living room where we'd spread maps and brochures for so many family adventures, I made a decision that surprised even me. If my children thought I was too old and slow for their active vacation plans, I'd show them exactly what this 69-year-old woman was capable of when she wasn't trying to accommodate everyone else's needs and preferences. The travel brochures scattered across my coffee table suddenly looked different. Not like family compromises, but like personal possibilities. I opened my laptop and began researching solo travel options for mature women, discovering a world of adventure I'd never considered while focusing on group dynamics and family-friendly activities. River cruises through Europe, photography tours of exotic destinations, educational journeys designed for curious adults who wanted depth over speed, comfort over challenge. The options were endless and appealing in ways that family compromise vacations never could be. The Mediterranean cruise caught my attention immediately. 3 weeks of luxury, visiting ports I'd always dreamed of exploring, with excursions designed for enjoyment rather than endurance. No one rushing me through museums. No complaints about my preference for cultural sites over shopping districts. No negotiations about dining choices or activity preferences. For the first time in decades, I could travel purely for my own interests and pace. The booking process felt like an act of rebellion, and self-liberation rolled into one. Balcony stateroom overlooking the sea. Shore excursions in Rome, Barcelona, and the Greek islands. Dining experiences I'd only dreamed about while researching family-friendly restaurants for our group trips. The cost was significant, but I realized I'd been spending comparable amounts on family vacations where my own preferences were constantly compromised for group harmony. The travel insurance agent asked about emergency contacts, and I found myself hesitating. Should I list the children who'd just voted me too burdensome for their company? The irony wasn't lost on me that they'd excluded me from their travels due to concerns about my well-being, but I'd still need their information for medical emergencies. I listed them anyway, because despite their hurtful decision, they were still my family and my closest relationships. I spent the next week quietly preparing for a journey I hadn't told anyone about. New clothes appropriate for Mediterranean weather, a travel journal to document experiences I wouldn't be sharing in real time with family members, camera equipment to capture memories that would be purely my own. Each purchase felt like reclaiming a part of myself I'd subordinated to family needs for so many years. The departure date was set for 2 weeks after their family vacation was scheduled to begin. Perfect timing, I thought. They'd be dealing with their own travel challenges while I was discovering what adventure looked like when designed around my interests, my pace, and my desires. No compromises, no accommodations for anyone else's limitations or preferences. Just me, the Mediterranean, and 3 weeks of experiences crafted for my enjoyment alone. The day before their family vacation departure, I finally told them about my cruise plans. The phone call with Susan was deliciously satisfying in ways I hadn't expected. "You booked a what?" she sputtered, her lawyer composure cracking as she processed the information that her supposedly fragile mother had arranged a solo international adventure more ambitious than their domestic family trip. "A 3-week Mediterranean cruise," I repeated calmly, enjoying her stunned silence. "Since you felt I was too old and slow for your vacation, I decided to find something more appropriate for someone my age. Apparently that means luxury accommodations, gourmet dining, and cultural enrichment at a civilized pace." The irony was perfectly crafted, and I could practically hear her mental gears grinding as she tried to process this unexpected development. Michael's reaction was pure confusion, mixed with concern. "Mom, are you sure about traveling alone? What if something happens? What if you need help?" His questions revealed the fundamental contradiction in their logic. I was supposedly too frail for family travel, but somehow expected to handle solo international adventure. The inconsistency was becoming clear even to them, though they weren't ready to admit their mistake yet. Jennifer's response was the most telling. "But Mom, we were trying to protect you from overexertion. A cruise might be even more tiring than our trip." The mental gymnastics required to frame solo luxury travel as more challenging than their active family adventure would have been amusing if it wasn't so transparent. They were beginning to realize that their vote might have been based on assumptions rather than reality. The grandchildren's reactions, filtered through their parents' phone calls, were pure excitement. "Grandma's going on a big boat adventure," Tommy had announced, apparently thrilled that his grandmother was planning something so obviously fun. Lucy wanted to know if I'd bring her a present from the Princess ship, her 8-year-old interpretation of a cruise liner. Their enthusiasm stood in sharp contrast to their parents' concerns and regrets. Over the next few days, as their departure approached, the phone calls from my children increased in frequency and decreased in confidence. Susan called to offer help with my travel arrangements. Suddenly concerned about details she'd been happy to exclude me from managing. Michael wanted to review my itinerary and emergency protocols, the same son who'd supported voting me out of their family trip due to logistical concerns. The shift in family dynamics was becoming apparent even before either trip began. Suddenly, I was the one with the exotic, enviable vacation plans while they were stuck with their own compromise-heavy family arrangements. The excitement and adventure they'd voted me out of was happening anyway, just without them. The fear of missing out was palpable in their voices, though none of them were ready to admit they'd made a mistake in excluding me. The day I boarded the Serenity of the Seas in Miami, I felt more alive than I had in years. The ship was magnificent, a floating palace of marble and crystal that made me feel elegant just by walking through its corridors. My balcony stateroom had a view of endless ocean that changed from turquoise to deep blue as we sailed toward Europe. And for the first time in decades, I had no one to consult about how to spend my time or what to see next. Captain Rodriguez welcomed solo travelers at a special cocktail reception the first evening, and I discovered I wasn't the only person who'd chosen adventure over accommodation. Margaret, a 72-year-old retired teacher from Boston, had booked the cruise after her family decided she was too set in her ways for their ski vacation. We laughed about the irony of being considered too inflexible for family trips while embarking on solo international adventures. The first port was Rome, and I took my time exploring the Colosseum and Vatican without anyone rushing me toward the next attraction or complaining about too much walking. I spent an entire afternoon sketching in a cafe near the Trevi Fountain, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for when managing family schedules and preferences. The freedom to follow my curiosity without compromise was intoxicating. Barcelona offered flamenco lessons and tapas tours, experiences I'd have never suggested to my efficiency-minded children. I learned to dance badly but enthusiastically, tasted wines I'd never heard of, and had conversations with fellow travelers that lasted for hours without anyone checking their watch or suggesting we move on to the next activity. Each day brought new discoveries about what I enjoyed when I wasn't trying to please everyone else. The Greek islands were magical in ways I'd only read about in guidebooks while planning family-appropriate activities. I wandered through Santorini's blue dome churches at sunset, swam in the crystal-clear waters of Mykonos, and bought myself jewelry I'd admired for years, but never purchased while budgeting for family vacation expenses. Every purchase, every experience, every moment was purely mine to enjoy. Meanwhile, my phone buzzed with updates from my children's vacation that sounded increasingly stressful and disappointing. Michael texted about restaurant reservations falling through and accommodations that didn't match their expectations. Jennifer called to complain about logistics challenges and the difficulty of keeping everyone happy with their activity choices. Susan's updates revealed the hidden costs and complications that apparently emerged when the family's usual travel organizer wasn't available. By the end of the first week, Margaret and I had formed a friendship that felt more genuine and energizing than family relationships I'd been carefully maintaining for years. We explored ruins together, shared books and wine recommendations, and laughed about the children who thought they were protecting us from adventures we were obviously capable of handling. Her stories of family condescension matched mine perfectly, and together we were proving that wisdom, resources, and determination were more valuable than youth and energy. 2 weeks into the cruise, I barely recognized the woman looking back at me in the mirror. My skin was bronzed from Mediterranean sun, my eyes were bright with excitement and newfound confidence, and my smile was genuine in ways it hadn't been for months. The constant stress of trying to accommodate everyone else's needs and preferences had melted away, replaced by the pure joy of discovering what I actually wanted from travel and life. The shore excursions became increasingly adventurous as I realized my supposed limitations had been more about family perceptions than physical reality. I climbed the steps to the Acropolis in Athens, without anyone suggesting I needed rest breaks, explored the narrow streets of Dubrovnik at my own pace without complaints about my speed, and took cooking classes in Turkish markets that my children would have considered too complicated or time-consuming. Margaret and I had attracted a group of like-minded travelers, mostly mature women and couples who appreciated thoughtful conversation and leisurely exploration over rushed sightseeing. Our dinner table became the social center for people who valued experiences over itineraries, quality over quantity, and genuine connection over efficient touring. I was rediscovering my personality outside of my role as family coordinator and budget manager. The phone calls from my children's vacation grew increasingly frustrated and apologetic. Without me handling the logistics they'd grown accustomed to having managed seamlessly, their trip was revealing the hidden complexity of successful family travel. Restaurant reservations I would have made months in advance were unavailable. Activities I would have researched and booked were either full or inappropriate for their mixed-age group. The financial coordination I'd handled invisibly was creating stress and disagreement about who paid for what. Susan called from a delayed airport, admitting that she was beginning to understand how much work I'd been doing behind the scenes of their family vacations. "Mom, I never realized how many details you were managing. We're having trouble finding restaurants that work for everyone, and the kids are complaining about everything." Her frustration was mixed with something that sounded like respect for skills she'd never acknowledged or appreciated. Michael's text about their shortened vacation due to budget overruns was particularly ironic. Without my financial contribution and careful cost management, their active vacation was proving more expensive and less satisfying than the luxury cruise they'd considered too indulgent for their practical mother. The very efficiency they'd claimed to want was falling apart without the person they'd voted too slow to include. Meanwhile, I was dining on fresh seafood overlooking the Aegean Sea, learning conversational Italian from charming locals, and planning future solo adventures with new friends who appreciated my company and conversation. Each day brought proof that my age was an asset rather than limitation. Experience had taught me to savor quality over quantity, to value depth over superficial coverage, and to choose comfort and beauty over compromise and accommodation. 3 weeks later, I returned to Miami transformed in ways that went far beyond my tan and new wardrobe. The woman who boarded that ship feeling rejected and diminished by her family's vote had discovered a version of herself that had been dormant for years, confident, adventurous, and delightfully free from the need to please everyone else before considering her own desires and dreams. The airport pickup was awkward but revealing. Susan, Michael, and Jennifer had all come to welcome me home, their faces showing a mixture of curiosity, embarrassment, and something that looked like newfound respect. They'd seen my social media posts throughout the cruise, photos of me dining in elegant restaurants, exploring ancient ruins, laughing with new friends, and realized their supposedly fragile mother had managed quite well without their supervision or accommodation. "Mom, you look amazing," Jennifer said, and for once her compliment didn't feel obligatory or condescending. "Your vacation looked incredible. We saw all your posts, and honestly, it made our trip look pretty boring by comparison." The admission cost her something, but it also opened space for a different kind of conversation than we'd had in years. Michael was full of questions about the logistics of solo travel, suddenly interested in understanding how I'd managed the details they'd assumed were beyond my capabilities. "How did you handle the airports alone? What about excursions and dining reservations?" Each question revealed how much they'd underestimated my competence, while overestimating my need for their management and protection. Susan's apology came during the drive home, delivered in her precise lawyer language but with genuine emotion behind the words. "Mom, we made a mistake. We thought we were protecting you, but we were actually limiting you. Your cruise looked like everything our vacation should have been, but wasn't." The acknowledgement felt like vindication, but more importantly, it felt like the beginning of a different relationship dynamic. The grandchildren's excitement about my adventure was pure and infectious. Tommy wanted to hear every story about the big boat, and Lucy made me promise to take her on a cruise when she was older. Their enthusiasm reminded me that age-appropriate adventures weren't necessarily less exciting than youthful ones. They were just different, often richer and more meaningful than the efficiency-focused travel my children had preferred. 6 months later, I'm planning my second solo adventure. This time a river cruise through Eastern Europe with Margaret and several friends I met on the Mediterranean cruise. My children have stopped voting on my travel capabilities and started asking for advice about their own vacation planning, finally recognizing the expertise they'd dismissed as outdated and burdensome. The relationship with my family has evolved into something healthier and more balanced. They still invite me on family trips, but now it's because they want my company, not because they feel obligated to include me. More importantly, they understand that my declining an invitation doesn't mean I'm giving up on adventure. It might mean I'm planning something even more exciting on my own terms. The vote that was meant to sideline me from family adventures instead launched the most adventurous period of my life. At 69, I've discovered that the best journeys sometimes begin when people tell you you're too old to travel. Age isn't a limitation. It's a qualification for the kind of travel that prioritizes experience over exhaustion, quality over quantity, and personal joy over group compromise. Tell me, have you ever been told you're too old, too slow, or too much trouble for something you wanted to do? Have you discovered that being excluded from one opportunity opened doors to even better possibilities? Share your story in the comments, because sometimes the people who try to limit us give us the perfect excuse to exceed every expectation they had. And if this tale of solo adventure and family awakening inspired you to consider your own uncompromising journey, subscribe to Grandpa's Stories. Life doesn't end when others decide you're inconvenient. It just gets more interesting when you stop letting them make the decisions.